What's up? What's up? What's up, everybody? Welcome into another YouTube live show here tonight. The last one, basically, of the actual college football season where we have games to talk about. And boy, do we have some games to talk about for the Big 12. Shout out and kudos to Baylor and Oklahoma State for winning New Year's 6 games. That is going to be a topic of discussion today for sure. I think in particular, as it surrounds the Baylor Bears, they deserve a lot of shine for what they've done in the past year, winning 12 games, a school record, winning a Sugar Bowl, the turnaround that Dave Aranda had from a 2-win season last year, on top of having the number one ranked team in college hoops right now and a national championship from college hoops last year, plus women's basketball and volleyball, both in the top 10 entering today. Baylor's got a ridiculous thing going on right now, and congrats to the Bears on their victory. But it underscores what has been a very good and very successful year for the Big 12. And if you're somebody that is not new to the channel, like you're a regular here on the channel, you know that we've been beating that drum throughout the entire season, that things could not have gone much better for the new look Big 12. You start taking things like this into the greater context and the grand scheme of things on where things are at. There's just no denying that this league took a step forward this year and certainly instilling a lot of confidence in what the league can be moving forward. And Baylor and Oklahoma State are big parts of that, obviously putting together 12-win seasons this year. And on top of all of that, they did so by knocking off the SEC and Notre Dame, right? The SEC and Notre Dame. It doesn't get much more fun than that for most people, but those of us in Big 12 country for sure. I see the quick shout out there from Bryson. Let's go, Brandon Jennings. Yes, K-State just landed arguably the best transfer portal linebacker that was out there. Former top 100 player from last year that's transferring from Maryland. And a lot of major offers. So very excited about that. That's in fact why I'm a little bit later than I intended to be with this live show here tonight, because K-State got some good, exciting news. And I'm sure you guys all saw all the promo that was going on for K-State taking on LSU coming up on Tuesday throughout the New Year's 6 game. So I hope that everybody out there, is going to watch K-State LSU coming up on Tuesday. Okay, everybody here on this channel, you better watch K-State LSU coming up on Tuesday. All right, I need you to do that for me. I don't ask much of you. I'm going to ask you to do that. Please do that for me. I hope that's going to be a good thing that I'm having you watch that game. Studio LB, what's up? I see in the chat the new Big 12 is sexy, not as sexy as Kurt's, though. Well, I think the new Big 12 would have a jawline that looks something like this if we were going to compare it to a jawline. So actually, I would suggest that it is just about as sexy as me. But I appreciate the shout out there, Studio LB. I see Wolf58 in here. What's up, Michael? What's up, Jeff? What's up, Aiden? Micah, as you guys file in here, I would appreciate it if you do like the video. If you could do me that favor, it would be awesome. Helps me out with the algorithm, helps me out with views, gets you guys better content, you know the game, et cetera, et cetera. If you could like the video, I would much appreciate that. Also, as the chat fills up, and please blow it up. Let's have some fun in the chat. Let's kick around some really fun Big 12 games from this past weekend in the chat. You can as well get your question or comment up to the top to make sure that I see it by donating. You can click the $ below the chat box where it says say something. That is the way to do that. That will also support, obviously, what I'm doing here on the channel. It is always much appreciated, those of you that do it. I see Wolf58 already touching on what you know will be a subject here, and that is just how god-awful the Pac-12 was during bowl season. And it just continues to, speaking of, underscore narratives that we've seen throughout the season and where things are headed. It just forecasts potential trouble for the Pac-12 if Lincoln Riley is not the real deal. I mean, that's the unfortunate part of it. I'll get into the full take later. But the unfortunate part of it, as we want to really beat this narrative home about the Pac-12 struggling, going 0-5 in bowl games. They haven't won a bowl game since the 2019 postseason. The unfortunate part about that is, like, as much as you want to just continue to hammer that home, the telltale thing for the Pac-12 is going to be like, is Lincoln Riley legitimately an elite coach? Which I think he is. And if he is, USC is probably going to get up and rolling, and they'll have their heavy hitter, and that can kind of drag the rest of the conference along. I think Oregon's going to continue to be about what it is. That's what they've really proven to be over time. Coaches will be able to win there, but not quite at that elite level, just at a very good level. So it's going to come down to, like, is Lincoln Riley that dude? Is he going to be that dude at USC? So I'm here for punishing, so to speak, the Pac-12 for its transgressions or lack of success, however you want to frame it, because I think it's warranted, especially in light, once again, of the way the Big 12 was treated this past offseason when Texas and Oklahoma left. However, I do say that with the caveat of fully realizing that even though I'm full team burn it down as far as the Pac-12 goes, and like, hey, bring them back down below the Big 12 in terms of national perception where they frankly belong right now, it can change very dramatically, depending on what happens with Lincoln Riley. The good thing on that front will be that the Big 12 has maintained all of its real coaching power up at the top this offseason. And that was with some major jobs going on. So you'd hope that the Big 12 will continue to have more of a depth of talent of coaching across the league, right, to continue matching up against the Pac-12. So those are all things that are on the outline for tonight. Let me go ahead and breeze through the rest of this. I mean, we'll talk about the specifics of the Oklahoma State and Baylor games. Really impressive efforts. I love the fact that, yes, first half against Notre Dame notwithstanding, everything else was basically won by defense for the teams in the league. Oklahoma State's defense with a crazy turnaround in the second half against Notre Dame, and Baylor just locking down Ole Miss the entire way. And the Big 12 was also at the center, because of this, of one of the biggest discussions nationally this weekend, which was the comments of Kirk Herbstreit and the ESPN crew, which were garbage, about players not loving the game, and that's why they're opting out, yada, yada, yada. That drew a ton of criticism, as it should have, and then we saw Matt Corral go out and get hurt on a pretty scary-looking injury against Baylor right away. So the Big 12 really was at the center, not just of the attention in terms of people watching games on New Year's Day after a disappointing New Year's Eve where the playoffs sucked, but then on top of that, this controversy involved a Big 12 team in Baylor. And I can't – someone let me know if I've just missed it. I have not seen the TV numbers yet from the games this weekend, the New Year's Six games, but I would imagine that the Fiesta and the Sugar did really big numbers, considering what the numbers were on some of the lesser bowl games that we've seen already up to this, which is, the Danny Cannells of the world that want to hate on bowl games. They're not going anywhere because the way these things are drawing right now, just kicking the crap out of the NBA, and other non-football related events right now. They're going to continue to rate. They're going to continue to be a thing. They're going to continue to be on. Speaking of the playoff, look, it was brutal. It was brutal. We'll talk about Cincinnati's performance. Just two very non-competitive games, although Cincinnati, I mean, they had it at 11 going into the fourth quarter. It's about as remotely competitive as anybody has been against Alabama in these playoff semifinal games. So I don't think it reflects on Cincinnati. That is definitely something I want to dive into today. Anybody that says that is very foolish. And I don't know that there's a ton of that going around, because I think by this point, we're just used to it. We know the drill, right? We know the drill. Bama is going to do Bama things. And they're just going to wind up destroying everybody, even in a year where they were as human throughout the regular season as they have been in a very long time. And that sucks, and it's disappointing. I do think there's one thing that can possibly change that, and I'll get to that later on here in terms of what we can do with the playoff to hopefully, eventually, maybe sometime down the road, stop some of this craziness for Bama, but we'll see. We'll see if everybody is going to follow through on that. All right, so we'll dive into all of that here on the show. That's basically the outline for what I have coming up for you today. I see some donations coming in already. If you guys want to donate, not only contribute to the channel and what I'm doing here, but also get your question or comment up to the top so that you make sure that I see it. You can click the $ below the chat box where it says say something. Much appreciate all of you guys. We start with Boom to the Sooner, one of the biggest friends of the channel here. Always appreciate him popping in and his support. Boom to the Sooner. First of all, I have to shout you out for the tweet that you sent me of Bob Stoops the other night after Stoops absolutely demolished Oregon and pulled a really cool move, by the way. You guys know, like, the Oklahoma stuff has been wildly entertaining for me. I've had some fun poking the Oklahoma fans for acting like the entire rest of the world does when they are a jilted lover, which is what Oklahoma was when Lincoln Riley left them. But Bob Stoops is cool. There's just no denying that. Like, there's no way around that. He's a very likable guy. There's no way I could possibly really hate on him, especially when I see him go pull something like the move after the game where he and Venables are both, like, up at the podium, and Stoops winds up ripping off the visor, taking off Venables' hat, and, like, giving him the visor, like that symbolic, hey, here you go, buddy. This is yours now. That was cool. That was a really cool moment. Not only just, like, playing to your base, but I think it's all genuine for Stoops. Like, remember that clip that circulated of him on the Fox set during the college football season? I think that was Red River, right? I think it was Red River where they caught a clip of him like just going nuts, like celebrating one of the scores. I want to say it was when Kennedy Brooks just won Red River. So like it's genuine. Like that guy loves Oklahoma and certainly loves Brent Venables. I think that much is very obvious. And stepped in and did. I mean, for Oklahoma to have a guy to call on like that and Stoops and really like calm the waters in a really turbulent time, and then go out and just smack Oregon like that, huge. Oklahoma fans should be forever indebted to Bob Stoops, and I honestly feel good for him because I think this probably helps change his legacy a little bit with Oklahoma fans who had, things had gone stale, grown a little bit stale with Stoops at the time that he left and handed things off to Lincoln Riley. So I know that's not really ground that I was planning on covering tonight, but there's a little boom to the Sooner because you've been such a great contributor to the channel. I'll give you a little extra Oklahoma talk. But boom to the Sooners question was, why has the Big 12 had so much success in bowl season recently? I just don't know that I'm going to subscribe a ton of meaning to all of this, with some exceptions, right? Like we're going to talk about the Pac-12. I think it's obvious the Pac-12 was not a very good league this year. And so when they go out and fart out an 0-5 bowl season, you can say, well, I mean, look, they're just not a very good league. But I don't think it's necessarily because of the bowl game performances. They just didn't have a whole lot going in terms of good teams out there right now. And then there was a lot of movement in terms of coaches at the big spots, the coaching carousel before bowl season even got here. So it's just kind of been a mess. You would expect that to portray itself in bowl games as well. But, one theory I would float is just like the Big 12 has wound up with a lot of schools in New Year's 6 games that really do care a lot about being there, as opposed to like Oklahoma being the one team that's getting to the playoff and then losing. The Big 12 has the rest of the league that teams like Baylor and Oklahoma State, they get to New Year's 6 games and like really genuinely care. And I think the most consistent indicator and predictor of success in bowl games, even though there's not really a great way to do it, is just simply motivation. And I think you've wound up with a lot of scenarios where there have been some teams that are pretty motivated there. I don't know that there's a whole ton to it beyond that and some luck and some bounces and who are you playing and who's opting in, who's opting out. And heck, I mean, even this time around, Notre Dame had a lot of opt-outs. Obviously, Matt Corral went down early in the game for Ole Miss. Now, fairness to Baylor, Ole Miss was averaging less than 3 yards per play with a pick already when Corral went out. So the Baylor defense was already swarming him. But you just wound up with some really highly motivated teams that are going there. And I guess the other thing I would just say, too, is we always think of the Big 12 as being kind of the opposite of the SEC, and that would be some of the argument, or the Big 10 where there's all these teams that are just terrible and there's just like some extra bloat to those conferences. The Big 12 hasn't had that. It's generally been a league pretty deep with decent teams and one team at the top. Whereas the SEC, you have 2 outstanding teams, like the best of the best, and that's really not just for this year. You typically are going to have 2 of the best, and then some pretty good teams, and then a lot of meh. Whereas the Big 12, it's just pretty strong and solid top to bottom, but you don't have the overwhelming favorites up at the top outside of what Oklahoma has been in a lot of years. So I guess that's probably about the best answer I think I could give you as far as Big 12 bowl game success historically, at least recent history right now, and why that might be an indicator there. Tommy wants to talk some Baylor. Appreciate the donation, Tommy. If you want to be like Tommy and Boom to the Sooner, you can click the $ below the chat box where it says say something to donate. Get your question or comment in there and support what I'm doing here at the channel. Tommy says Baylor has their best season in years and still can't beat TCU. You hate to see it. In all seriousness, it was great to see the Big 12 go 2-0 on Saturday. Hey, I appreciate that, Tommy. If you want to get in your little dig, your little shot at the rival, obviously I am a man who does plenty of that. So I can't fault you for that. And that is one of those games like, Baylor, I'm not here to rain on your parade, and everything right now should be celebratory in terms of a 12-win season and everything that the Bears accomplished. But that is like one of the most head-scratching games of the season to go back and look at now and think like, what would have happened had that not gone down for Baylor? Although, honestly, I think what we learned by watching the playoff games and what we've learned from watching playoff games now since they started back in 2014 is just – it would have been the same thing that happened to Cincinnati, probably, with Baylor, honestly. I mean, Baylor threw for 40 yards against Ole Miss, and that's a defense that certainly is not Alabama's. Will Anderson is certainly not running around on the Ole Miss defense. So I think probably the same thing winds up happening ultimately for Baylor, but you would have felt better about that getting into the playoff, like breaking through, especially after Baylor was on the outside looking in 2014 and that whole fiasco and what went down with Ohio State getting in there. So sure, it would have been better, but maybe not as much better as we would have thought. And that's part of the point here that I wanted to make about the performance of both Oklahoma State and Baylor. There is this obvious shift toward bowl games not meaning as much. And especially, I think the New Year's Six games can get sandwiched in a spot where you're stuck with teams that aren't very excited to be there, guys opting out. Like, for instance, the Peach Bowl this year with Michigan State and Pitt, the two guys you would want to watch from that game, aren't actually playing there. But there is still a lot of meaning to some of these games for some of these teams. And Oklahoma State and Baylor are perfect examples of that, where that meant a hell of a lot to each of those schools to get a 12th win and to play for Baylor, a team from the SEC, and for Oklahoma State, Notre Dame. Mike Gundy, I saw Mike Gundy in his postgame press conference. He called it the biggest win in Oklahoma State history, winning a New Year's Six game and doing it against a tradition-rich power blue blood like Notre Dame. So there is still a lot of meaning that you can assign to those games. And that's why, I come away from watching Baylor and the reaction of that and the coronation of that team and the Aranda turnaround and everything. And I'm just thinking, I don't know, man, at the end of the day, what is better? I don't want to sit here and be like, well, Baylor, you would have just been rolled by Alabama. But I think the reality is once you get Alabama fully motivated, fully torqued in a playoff scenario, they're going to do that to basically anybody. They're just, I love the term crockpotting, which I'm stealing from the Solid Verbal, which is a great college football podcast that you guys should go check out. But they always talk about Alabama crockpotting teams where they don't, it's not like you just come out and blitz them and they're up 35-0 after the first quarter, but it's just a slow, steady rush of just killing you softly. And by the end of it, you're like, man, well, we lost that game by 28 points. It never felt like it was all at once, but just slowly but surely, they just sucked all the life out of us, and we never really had any kind of a chance. And that was what happened to Cincinnati. I think it would have happened to Baylor. I think it would have happened to Oklahoma State. I think it would have happened to basically anybody. Look at what happened to Michigan against Georgia, who is a team that totally laid an egg against Bama in the SEC championship game. So I don't know. At the end of the day, celebrating in the Sugar Bowl, this awesome win, and showing off your defense and what this program is all about. I saw Aranda talking after the game so much about identity. This is our team. This is our identity that we got to go out there and display and win in this win, which is just defense, great defense, and then running the ball with Abram Smith. I don't know. It's a pretty good showcase for the program. And getting into the playoff and getting crock-potted by Bama, well, you're still winning a Big 12 championship either way. I don't know. I think there's at least an argument to be made for this being in the vicinity of the same sort of ending there. And you get to celebrate at the end of the year as opposed to be very frustrated by what would have likely happened against Alabama had you eked into the 4th spot in the playoff. And I'm somebody who sat here and advocated on the eve of the playoff, we should be taking more of a look at Georgia's resume versus Baylor's resume and seeing here who would actually belong in the playoff. And maybe it's a little bit different against Georgia. I don't know. It's hard to know how you reconcile what happened to Georgia against Bama in light now of just blitzkrieging Michigan in the playoff. Also, and look, we'll get our answer in the playoff championship game, which is okay, great. Bama, Georgia coming up here a week from Monday, 8 days from now. But, I digress. It was cool. It's a very, very cool consolation prize for both Oklahoma State and Baylor to go out with those kind of wins. More so for Baylor because they have the Big 12 championship in tow, obviously, with beating Oklahoma State in that regard also. But, man, just very, very cool things. And coming as a fan of a school that is in a similar spot, well, in general, a similar spot to Baylor and Oklahoma State in terms of their place in the college football world and the college athletics world at K-State, I can very much relate to how exciting it would be to win a game like that. Now, I laugh and hesitate there because one of the topics I want to get into, and I'll just move into it right now, is guys, we may be looking at the best athletic department in the country in Baylor. If you think about the totality of this athletic department and what it is doing in particular with the two main sports that really matter, the revenue sports, football and men's basketball, man, I mean, the year that Baylor's had, it is hard to argue against right now. And I know you can look back and say, well, John, I mean, that was a 2-7 team last year. It's been up and down at Baylor here. But to me, that's part of the point with what Baylor has done football-wise. They've been able to do it with multiple coaches. And that's why I really think there is a legitimate argument here. I mean, first of all, just on the surface, there's a pretty hearty argument for Baylor there to be best athletic department in the country because they're the reigning national champions in basketball. They have a team that is very capable of running it back and doing the same thing, as hard as that is in college hoops. But the men's basketball program is just firing on absolutely every single cylinder right now that it possibly could be. Totally overshadowed by the football team's performance this weekend is another top 10 win for top 10 road win, by the way, for the Baylor basketball program at Iowa State. So, I mean, it's going pretty well right now for Baylor would be the point. So you have a Sugar Bowl, a national championship in basketball, still a number one team rolling right now, all in the last calendar year for Baylor, plus women's basketball, volleyball. Those are both top 10 teams. We know about the women's basketball program. Like, it's just really, really, really good. There are a lot of things being done really well at Baylor right now. Mack Rhoades is in an excellent, excellent spot. And yes, I see Rob the comment here, and I know that there will be a lot of this. Baylor is not the most popular place in the league because of the scandal and what has happened there before, and certainly some pretty heinous things occurred under Art Briles when he was there. And Rob says there it's still the worst athletic department on the planet because of that. Taking all of the, and this is impossible to do and not really like the right thing. I understand the morality of all of that, and I've been very clear if you ever listen to my radio show about my thoughts on that and how everything went down during the Art Briles era. And even if you go back to basketball and Dave Bliss, like what's happened at Baylor before, there have been some really bad things that have happened within the athletic department at Baylor there before, but they've also rebuilt it. They've come up from the ashes. And if we're talking about just the mere athletic achievement of what they're doing, to be able to rebound from those sorts of, one, tragedies, and two, if we're thinking about the victims, certainly tragedies, and two, just PR nightmares and like legitimate penalties, like the basketball program not being able to play a non-conference schedule once upon a time when Scott Drew first took over, and to rebuild and come back at a place that is not a college athletics mecca, not a blue blood. It's a place that when they came into the Big 12, everybody was like looking around like, how did they do that? There's all the talk of the political pressures that got in to the state of Texas to actually get Baylor into the league in the first place. Like, nobody thought they would be there. It's just unbelievable that a place like that could rebound from two just crazy, like heinous scandals that occurred and get to the point where they're at now, winning national championships in basketball and New Year's Six games in football. So do not let that go by when we're talking about this, like this discussion, who has the best athletic department in college athletics. I would, right now, this snapshot in time, I would argue for Baylor. Now, the counter argument to that I think is the most logical that I would accept is just like, look, man, Alabama hired Nick Saban. That's the best move that's ever occurred, arguably, in the history of college athletics. So they win. And that is the sport that matters. It's what drives everything. They're killing everybody. Any comers, doesn't matter. They win the national championship basically every other year. Alabama has to be it. I would just prefer more nuance to this discussion, even though at the end of the day, if we're talking about what like really truly matters to people and where things are going eventually, yeah, I mean, that probably is the right answer. But if we're going to be more nuanced about it and just breadth of the accomplishment of an athletic department, as opposed to just saying, because, we get too dangerously close with that to just saying like, hey, best football program. Now we're opening up the can of worms to like, does anything matter besides football really at any of these schools? If we're going to allow anything else to matter, I think Baylor has to be the answer right now. And even with football, so much of this is because they've done it under multiple coaches. It is not just a one-year flash in the pan here that they made this game, which is, there's a lot of talk about Aranda's comeback going from 2 wins to 12 wins this year, and rightfully so. But I think it was very clear to me there was still a lot of championship DNA left over from Matt Rule 2 years before when he got them to a New Year's Six Bowl and got them to the Big 12 championship game. there's still a lot left over there. And that's because Baylor has built like a legitimate program and has obviously things in place in a very competent athletic department to be able to go from Bryles, who was excellent but mired in scandal, take that PR hit, come back around, hire the next guy who is great and get you back to the Big 12 championship game just like that, and then lose him to the NFL and then make the next excellent hire and keep the infrastructure and resources in place to allow him to flourish and flourish as quickly as he did. I mean, looking back on it, yes, I know that it's been well documented. Aranda learned a lot of lessons in that first year. He made some important coordinator changes and coaching staff changes that paid huge dividends this year. There's no doubt about that. But I think the biggest factor in all this was just simply he was a new coach hired during a pandemic year, literally the worst time to be a new coach in college football history. There has never been a worse time in college football history to be a new coach than last year and what Aranda dealt with. So I think to me, circling all the way back here, the fact that Baylor had everything in place to be able to do that, that is not a given, not an easy thing to do at all. Baylor is not a school that is supposed to be able to do that and just rebound and churn out multiple coaches winning 11 plus games and putting together the best season in school history and going out and beating the SEC in New Year's 6 games. And oh, by the way, yes, with the basketball program that is as good as anybody in the country, that's not supposed to happen. And that is an unbelievable accomplishment. And it rivals anything that's going on anywhere in the rest of the college athletics world right now. So for my money, it's Baylor right now. I saw somebody reference on Twitter like Texas won the Learfield Directors Cup, which is supposed to be best athletic department in the country, ostensibly, right? Because it's taking into account all the different sports and how much success you have there. But like, look, we know Texas would trade that in a heartbeat. Can you imagine what the world would be like if Texas had the year that Baylor has had with a national championship in hoops and a New Year's 6 win in football? Like, we would never hear the end of it. It would be awful. Instead, it's Baylor that's sitting here doing that. So it deserves a lot of shine and a lot of respect. Boom to the Sooner. Appreciate the donation. If you want to be like Boom to the Sooner, you can donate by clicking the $ below the chat box where it says say something. It'll get your question or comment up to the top, supersede the rest of the chat, and support what I'm doing here on this channel. Boom to the Sooner asks, am I picking K-State to beat LSU? I am. I will tell you that right now. Tomorrow morning, we're recording the pregame radio show for K-State and LSU, holding off until the last minute, just hoping that game was going to happen because I'd heard very early on in the process there was a lot of worry about whether or not LSU would actually make it to the finish line there. But hey, now we're here. I would pick K-State to win simply, again, because what did I say earlier? It was actually a question that you asked, Boom to the Sooner. The most predictable, reliable thing in bowl games to me, even though it still is not very reliable because bowl games are a total crapshoot, the most predictable thing that you have, the best of a bad option, is motivation. And who is more motivated when it's a game between Kansas State and LSU? I don't need to tell you the answer to that. It's going to be K-State. They will be far more motivated. Literally nobody decided to ditch this bowl game. All hands on deck. Everybody's ready to go. And I know K-State's not chock full of NFL talent and guys that would be going pro early, but for various reasons, you could certainly get guys doing that if the game didn't matter. These guys want to play LSU. They really want to play LSU. And at the same time, LSU has a lot of guys that have opted out, left. They have this weird quarterback situation where we don't know whether or not they're going to have a starting quarterback basically available to go. LSU has gotten the decision from the NCAA on whether or not they get a waiver to not burn this kid's red shirt to play him, but they're not saying it publicly, so nobody really knows yet. I'm guessing he will play, but nobody has revealed that publicly yet. The long story short is that LSU is going to be kind of a shell of itself. I even saw a picture today from the practices that are going on in Houston, the two teams' practices. It was clear that K-State had like 30 or 40 more players actually there practicing on the team right now. You could just see like a difference. It was crazy, actually, how much of a difference it looked in terms of how many guys were actually out there. So it just clearly there are more resources being dumped into it from the K-State side of things. And K-State they're a competent team. 7-5, probably should have been 8-4, but hey, losing that Texas game got to change at offensive coordinator, so maybe it'll be a better thing in the long run. But they're an aggressively competent team. I think that's the best description I've seen of K-State this year. Aggressively competent. So I got to get to a couple other donations here. Michael Wall, we should hand SEC fans, boosters, alumni, staff, and students Kirby vacuums to suck up all those excuses for losing bowl games. Houston Cougs. That was good. That was good stuff. I like that comment. Also, thank you, Daniel, for the donation. I see Daniel, nothing attached to it, no question or comment, but I appreciate the donation. I appreciate you tuning in, Daniel. I do. Thank you very much for that. Let me go back here. It was Michael who had the shot at SEC fans, boosters, alumni, staff, and students. Well, the problem here is, and shout out to Houston, by the way, Michael, for Houston's bowl win and a great season for Dana Holgerson. Speaking of teams with 12-win campaigns. So what is that? Four? Cincy also? Four teams from the future Big 12 won 12 games this year. That's a stat. That's a heck of a stat right there. But the problem with the SEC is that now they have the All-SEC championship game, and you kind of lose that edge that we had last week. Like, hey, let's make fun of the SEC. They've had this rough start. Well, the joke is now these are the bowl games and whatever that they care about, and obviously the playoff games that they care about, and they're winning, and they are. I mean, I have nothing to say. They're clearly the class of college football. It's boring. There's no real argument against it. Again, I think Bama should have been more punished as we were going along with this for the way they were playing during the regular season. But in the end, Bama is pretty inevitable because of the talent that they have. And when the games and the lights are on, like that really, really matter, they're typically going to show up and that talent is going to start to shine. You don't have to worry about motivation or playing road games. Things that can really mess up some of the order there, so to speak, in the college football world and provide some upsets. So generally it works out like that. So as much as I want to continue to take shots at the SEC and make fun of them, I mean, there's nothing really to say. There's nothing really to say about it. Other than I think what's worthy of discussion is like, how do we change this? How do we get out of this mode where there's just nothing that we can do outside of watching an inevitable Alabama? And to me, and when I say inevitable Alabama, really it's like the inevitable 4 or 5 teams. But even like I was going through some of the college football playoff results, these semifinal games, like, I mean, they're just, everybody has been blown out, even Ohio State and Clemson and Oklahoma, obviously. Like, they've all been blown out in semifinal games too. It really is. It's like Alabama, LSU, Georgia, and then everybody else. Like, how do you actually get to a point where you can have some more parity beyond that? And I think what this weekend has really amplified once again is just the need for a 12-team playoff. I see Fallen Hero, pray for Saban retirement. Yes, that would definitely help too. And I know Saban went on a nice little diatribe and asked a question about like what's good for the game, about, hey, I'm not going to apologize for winning these games. And like Saban absolutely should not, man. Like, he's got the thing rolling. He's on a quest to be the greatest coach in college football history. He might already be. Like, he should not apologize for that. But I do think a 12-team playoff could help curb some of this a little bit. One, what it would do is just actually give us entertaining playoff games to watch. Right now, the college football playoff is a pretty crappy product. I almost just cursed there. Pretty crappy product because the same teams are there all the time. There's no real intrigue to it, and especially in the semifinal games, 12 of the 16 semifinal games that have been played in the playoff have been decided by 17 points or more. They're just always blowouts. We usually have 1 or 2 teams, more often than not, from the SEC or Clemson or Ohio State. Well, always that group that are better than everybody else, so much better than everybody else that we wind up with these sorts of games. But if you have a 12-team playoff, there would just be more intrigue to the early rounds. And I'm not saying that in and of itself is going to change the end result. I don't think it would. But at least then it's a more entertaining product. And right now, I mentioned, like, you have these New Year's 6 games that have lost some luster. Guys are opting out. They don't mean as much to some of these teams that are playing in them. But what if instead of, I saw this example laid out there, I don't remember who it was, but instead of the Peach Bowl being a game that is ultimately fairly meaningless between Michigan State and Pitt, and Kenny Pickett and Kenneth Walker both opt out, what if that is a college football playoff quarterfinal game and it's played on campus somewhere? Like, that game is being played in like at Pitt, or that game's being played in East Lansing. I mean, that would be an awesome atmosphere. It would be an incredibly intense game. You'd get both of those guys playing against each other because the carrot is still out there to advance in the playoff. And we would just get way more enjoyment out of it as college football fans. I mean, it's already drawing very well. So from a TV rating standpoint, it's not like they would need to do a ton to continue to make that a viable product, but it would obviously be much more entertaining to the rest of us. And like, I'll be honest, I didn't really watch much at all of Pitt, Michigan State. I just wasn't that interested without those two guys playing. If those two guys are playing and it's a college football playoff quarterfinal game, you bet your butt I'm going to be tuning into that. I would absolutely watch that. And I think that would just be better for the sport to give us this product, right, which ESPN has just shoved in our faces and changed the whole context of the college football world to where that is the only thing anybody really, like from a national standpoint, cares about as it regards college football. If that's going to be the case, we need to make this a better product. And the only way to make it a better product right now is to just add some more games that would actually be meaningful, put them on campuses, and have teams like Oklahoma State, like Baylor, be hosting playoff games. That would be great. Can you imagine Boone Pickens Stadium like hosting a college football playoff quarterfinal game this year? Would have been awesome. And you would get great games, really intriguing matchups. And then instead of just being in the Battle Frog PlayStation Fiesta Bowl, like there would be more stakes attached to it where, you know, one of these teams is going to move on and get their shot later on in the playoff at perhaps one of the real big boys. So I think that helps there. I see, Boom to the Sooner, your donation and your question. I will get to it in just a minute. I'm going to finish this thought real quick. The other thing that an expanded playoff could do is just allow more teams to make the playoff, which in turn creates the perception, if you're a recruit out there, that you have a chance to go win it all at more schools than you do right now. Whereas right now, if you legitimately want to win a national championship and you are a top flight high school player, you've got 4 or 5 choices. If you want to legitimately win a national championship, you basically have 4 choices. It's going to be Bama, it's going to be Georgia, maybe LSU, Ohio State, and we'll see about Clemson. We'll see where Clemson's going, but I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, lump them in there. I mean, that's it. But if you have routinely Oklahoma State's, Baylor's, Michigan State's, Notre Dame, Michigan, teams like that making a 12-team playoff, you can very much easier sell like, hey, you can get to the playoff, which is where we ultimately need to be to like compete. And then over time, as it becomes more obvious that more schools are there and have a chance to compete in this cool thing and play cool games, and where the carrot is still there at the end of the tunnel, that you can run and chase, and you can theoretically actually win a national championship. Like more teams have access to the playoff that will get you to the national championship. I think then you could see some of the talent start to disperse more over college football as time goes on. So to me, that is still something that is very, very viable and that can happen. It won't happen overnight. It would take some time, but I think that could help change some of the concentration of talent a little bit. That could at least help. And maybe once every couple of years, we would get some sort of upset in the college football playoff semifinal, which right now seems like a pipe dream to even get to that, where you would just toss me an upset here or there, just something, just one. I'm not asking for all of it, but just one here or there. You just can't even get it right now at all. You can't buy it. Boom to the Sooner. Appreciate the donation. Boom to the Sooner says, now that OU has Venables at Clemson during the national title years, can they beat Bama? If not, what is the formula to take down Bama? Well, you know my thoughts, Boom to the Sooner. I'm not as high on Venables overall. I do not think he will be as elite of a coach as Lincoln Riley was. I have my reservations about him. However, if you are going to build that case, Clemson is a team that at one point in time did dominate Alabama in a national championship game. They have proven that they can beat them, and not only beat them, but dominate them. So there is a selling point. Like Venables clearly knows how to get a defense ready to do that. My questions are, does Venables know how to get a program when he's running the ship, a program fully in totality ready for that? And by the way, I do hate to say this to you, Boom to the Sooner, because you're very good to me here on this channel, but Jeff Lebby's offense did not look very good against Baylor. Ole Miss's offensive coordinator, that's what you're getting, right? Did not look very good against Baylor. And that's been the real nemesis of Oklahoma's Dave Aranda, going back to the LSU game a couple of years ago. He's always had their number, and that was the case once again. But you could say, like, hey, Venables does know how to shut down Alabama, at least with the elite level talent he had at Clemson. If he can get the same level of talent in at Oklahoma on that defense, you can get a pretty similar level of talent overall. But that's really been concentrated on the offensive side. If you can start doing that on defense, he knows how to get the pieces maneuvered around the board to be able to shut down Clemson in a national championship game or semifinal, or I'm sorry, Bama in a semifinal sort of game. But to me, the problem will be getting there, and the problem will be like everything else. I don't doubt. I've seen it with my own two eyes, and we've seen Venables involved in like 100 different national championship games going back to 2000 at Oklahoma. The guy can coach defense, and the guy could certainly get a defense ready to go there. To me, it's all about the program, everything else that it takes to get there. And I think Lincoln Riley just had a very elite setup with the program and the situation that they were in and a brand, and being able to just go handpick the quarterback every single year, whether that's out of the portal or whether that's a high school kid. I think those are the types of things, like, I'm just going to have to see it to believe it from Venables that he could actually do that. But it is a good question. It is a good question. And if the rest of the college football world is like kind of left here grasping at straws to find some way to compete with Alabama, hiring guys who have actually proven to be able to beat Nick Saban in whatever capacity, I can see the logic as to why you would want to do that and why that might be a good way to go. I can certainly see the logic there. Speaking of the college football playoff, we do need to talk a little bit about Cincinnati. I feel bad here, Cincy, man. I wanted you guys to legitimately show out in that game, and I don't think it's fair to say like Cincinnati didn't show out. I think basically Cincinnati showed up and played the same role, if not slightly better, that every other semifinal opponent, or at least 9 out of 10 of them so far that Bama has faced in the playoff era. They played that same type of role everyone else has. And I think the coaching chops of Fickle and just the general toughness and grittiness of Cincinnati showed out to the point that they kept it to an 11-point game heading into the fourth quarter. Like, to me, that took some real savvy to be able to do when it was clear that Bama just had them whipped up front, like just had them manhandled. I mean, like, Sauce Gardner played a great game. Cincy's corners, like secondary guys, the rest of that defense, pretty good. Like they have some skill guys, some skill talent. Obviously Ritter is pretty good, but they couldn't handle him up front. And that's really, I saw Stuart Mandel writing about that being basically the problem for anybody against Bama. And when they roll up against these SEC teams in the playoff, that's where they have them beat is depth of talent, high-end talent and depth of talent in the trenches. You can find skill guys that are worthy enough to compete with them, but you just will get worn down by them. And that goes back to the crock-potting thing that Bama does. It's because they are so good in the trenches. But yeah, I see Wolf 58 since he was respectable. I think that's, honestly, that's a pretty good way to frame it. I'm a little bit more confident than making it purely, I think. I feel like Cincinnati was respectable. I think that was a respectable effort. And look, Cincinnati, the margin of victory for Alabama, the margin of loss for Cincinnati was less than Florida State, Oregon, Michigan State, Ohio State twice, Notre Dame, Oklahoma, Clemson, Michigan, and even Alabama once in a college football playoff game. All of those teams have lost games by greater margins than what Cincinnati did in the playoff setting. So there's really no argument here that Cincinnati was abnormal. There's no argument here that the group of 5 doesn't belong. None of that flies. That was a respectable effort. It's just what Bama does to everybody. Probably looked the most similar to the Washington game. What was that? Like 2016 when Washington played Bama in a semi. I think the final score was 24-7. And it was just another one of those where it was like, Washington had John Ross. They were trying to get him going, but there just wasn't much at all offensively. And the defense tried to keep him in it and, keep it relatively close, but there was never really any feeling that there was a legitimate chance for Bama to lose the game. And certainly that was the case. I mean, nobody ever thought that Cincinnati was going, once the game really got going, I don't think many thought that Cincinnati had a legitimate chance, but it was like, okay, they're trying to keep it as interesting as they possibly can. And there are missed opportunities. The muff punt that they didn't get, getting a turnover right around midfield, going backwards. Ritter's, the one that I would think about if I were Cincinnati is missing that potential first touchdown when Ritter had a pass get batted down. I don't remember if that was like first and goal or second and goal, but a goal to go situation. And they wound up having to kick the field goal. If you get a touchdown there and that gives you some confidence early on and you're rolling, and that would make it 7-7, and maybe things are a little bit different for a while. That'd be the one that I would really lament. But in the end, Bama was just clearly far and away a superior team, as they basically always are. But it should not reflect poorly on Cincy at all, and it should not take away from the accomplishment. And here is like back to the Baylor discussion about the way Baylor's season ended, and would it be better if they had beaten TCU and made it to the playoff, and then they take the 27-6 loss at the end of the year here to Bama. Baylor sits here and has a really fun as hell end of the season, gets to celebrate that game, be propped up, and get a lot of roses and get the flowers for their accomplishments here in this live chat. Whereas Cincinnati is more of an afterthought here in this chat, and I have to get around to just being like, hey, don't be hard on Cincinnati. They were fine. That was a perfectly acceptable effort. They were fine. But yet, Cincinnati, you would argue, had the better season because they made the playoff, right? That's tough. That's tough. What is the cooler way to go out when Bama is so inevitable? That's the case study. You look at the way it ended for Cincinnati versus the way it ended for Baylor, and there's an argument that it would almost be better to be Baylor just for the way that this season ended. I still think being able to say you're a team that's in that elite club that's made the playoff, obviously there's a lot of significance to that, and particularly for Cincy this year because they are the first group of 5 team that did it. But something to think about, something to ponder here. Man, I'm looking right now at my sheet. There are a couple things that I have left. I will remind you, I've got probably another 10 minutes left here on this chat that I'll give you guys before I hit about the 1 hour mark. If you want to, 1, donate to the channel and donate to what I'm doing, and 2, make sure your question or comment gets up to the top of the chat and supersedes everything else. You can donate by clicking the $sign below the chat box where it says say something. Appreciate all of you guys who have done that so far here tonight, but you can continue to do so to get my attention here. I would also appreciate it if everybody that's in here right now, we have a lot more than the last time I said this, if you could like the video, it would really help me out. You can just go right now and like the video. That always helps. So I laugh because I just see on my nose, ESPN needs to shut the hell up. This is the comments from, it wasn't just Kirk Herbstreit, it was Desmond Howard on the game day set on Saturday as they're getting ready to roll into everything. And it culminated. It's this whole point about these players are opting out and it's the players' fault because they don't love the game. That's basically me paraphrasing what Kirk Herbstreit said. These players don't love the game like we used to, and that's why they're opting out. Instead of, I don't know, perhaps looking internally at the fact that ESPN has turned this whole sport, which is beautiful and quirky and unbelievably exciting and regionalized and has so many great quirks because of all the rivalries and things that are specific to the different regions, all these things to love about the sport and that the sport should be about. Instead, since 2014 with the playoffs, since ESPN has it, everything is directed toward the only thing anybody should care about is the playoff. Playoff. And you take one thing away from this channel and one thing away from the way I like to watch the game, it's that do not let the college football playoff dictate how you think about a season or what the product is. That is not it at all. That is not it at all. There is something for everybody in college football, and there are ways to have unbelievably accomplished, crazy fun seasons without making it to the playoff and having to be the team that gets slaughtered by Alabama, right? And so that's the frustrating part. It's like ESPN created this. They created this monster in this environment where Kenny Pickett is not really incentivized to go play the Peach Bowl because it doesn't really mean anything. That's one. There are 2 parts of this. All of it worked out I love the chef's kiss. It worked out pretty chef's kiss that, one, it's the irony that everybody pointed out of ESPN commentators being thrown out there to be like, oh, why does nobody care about anything outside of these? It's the kids' fault. Clearly, it's the kids' fault. It's not me that's out of touch. It's the kids' fault when you're the one that created this anyway. The great meme, the Reddit college football account of the great meme of the guy that's shooting at somebody and looks and has the gun pointed there and shooting somebody. And it's why would the players do this? Really, it's actually obviously ESPN that has done this and created this aura where the playoff is the only thing that matters. The other part of it is there is clearly clearly an injury risk if you're going out there and playing. And, we've seen Jake Butt before, the tight end from Michigan who went out, decided to play, got injured, a bad injury, cost him some money. We saw it happen to Matt Corral later that night, like on the ESPN family of networks, no less. Matt Corral goes out, gets hurt. Now, thankfully, x-rays are negative, and man, I hope the best for him because he is a really fun college football player to watch. But, very quickly, the quintessential example of why some of these guys do opt out that has nothing to do with loving the game or not, the quintessential example of it comes out, and you see exactly why they're not doing it. I'll throw Iowa State a bone here and say, watching the Cheez-It Bowl last week, like Breece Hall was there. He showed up and went to the game. He was on the sidelines cheering on his teammates. If that's a guy that doesn't love the game or doesn't care, why would he waste his time going and hanging out with the team on the sideline during the game? Like, he would have better things to be doing, getting ready for the NFL draft, going and hanging out with friends, partying, whatever it is that you're suggesting he would rather do than play football or be around his teammates. But no, he was there. Like, it's such a phony, terrible take. One, out of touch. Two, very much ESPN shill. It just reeks of all of those things. That take has been very appropriately lambasted by everybody throughout the course of media. So I've been very, very glad to see that. There have been some bad takes in the college football world, man. We had Danny Cannell saying that we shouldn't have these bowl games. We had Dennis Dodd getting dunked on by Shane Beamer for making fun of how much everybody cared about the Mayo Bath and the Duke's Mayo Bowl. A lot going on in that regard that can be perceived as pretty bad takes. But hey, we all have bad takes from time to time. I certainly have not been perfect in that regard. All right, we're going to close out with this. So I've got, let's see, maybe like 5 minutes here left. 5 minutes. If you want to get something in, hit me with a donation, the $ below the chat box where it says say something. That will take it up to the top of the chat, and I will see it. Also supports what I do here on the channel. Last thing, we have to end with the Pac-12. I did promise somebody on Twitter who was like, oh, you can't let the Pac-12 skirt on this, man. You better bring this point home. Okay, I will. The Pac-12 was an abject disaster in bowl season. And again, I am not one to assign a ton of meaning to what happens in bowl season. But we're seeing a trend now with the Pac-12. They have not won a bowl game since the 2019 postseason. They went 0-2 last year in the weird COVID year in bowl games, and then this year 0-5. So 0 for their last 7 in bowl games each of the last 2 years. And it's not just that, man. It's like how it happened. You had Oklahoma absolutely demolishing Oregon with an interim coach. You had Utah blowing it in the Rose Bowl. I mean, come on, Utah. Damn it. Like that is a game that I very much wanted to see go the way of the Utes. It doesn't. But then, man, like Central Michigan stepped in and beat Wazoo. Utah State beat Oregon State. Like, they're not good results for the Pac-12. And a part of why this point to me is free of the just like, oh, don't make too much out of bowl games thing is the fact that the Pac-12 this year against FBS competition that obviously was not within its own conference, the Pac-12 going outside of the Pac-12 to play FBS teams, 9-23. I had to look just to double check because it's like when I say it seems unreal. That is the most unbelievable stat to me of the college football season, that the Pac-12 was 9-23 against FBS competition outside of the league. That's not Power 5 competition. That is just FBS, And I mean, like half of those losses are to BYU, for example, which is why it has to just be FBS and not Power 5. Like, they went 0-5 against BYU. That is bad. And that is a league that has a wealth of problems. And it just feels like because they're on the West Coast and they just kind of get ignored as opposed to like stepped on and dunked on as much as the Big 12 seemingly did and does, it is frustrating that it's like, if the Big 12 were 9-23 this year, if the Irate 8 were 9-23 this year against FBS competition outside of just what's in the league, that it feels like that would be getting more run nationally. It absolutely feels like that would be getting more run nationally. Instead, the only thing you're going to hear about the Pac-12 is you're going to hear about Lincoln Riley, which is fair. Again, I think he is fair to an extent. I think he's an elite coach. I think he is going to make that league much, 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 much better. and they should be thanking their lucky stars that USC was able to land him. But we're the only ones seemingly yelling this through a megaphone, just how bad the Pac-12 has been this year in relation to the Big 12. And man, 9-23 versus FBS opponents. That is brutal. That is a league that is pretty broken. And even Oregon now, Oregon's going to have to pick up the pieces. We'll see about Dan Lanning. Maybe the guy's the greatest thing ever. But Oregon has been treated kind of as a stepping stone sort of job, or just a job that's not a destination job that anybody wants to stay at, even though it's been relatively successful. And now you have a guy that's left there, and they're going to have to pick up the pieces and start over. If it were this, and then USC had hired like James Franklin, that was the thing that was rumored for a long time. How bad would you be feeling about the league if you're George Kliavkov, if you're the TV partners, whatever, and USC has just hired James Franklin, where you're kind of like, oh, okay, the guy's been like a 500 Big Ten coach the last 5 years at Penn State. You're adding that to the conference, and that's supposed to be the big saving grace here of a league that was 9-23 against FBS opponents and hasn't won a bowl game since 2019. Terrible. It's a league that's obviously been mismanaged, bad TV contract, or bad the Pac-12 network has been completely mismanaged. There are some horror stories about that and how it's worked out. That league has 99 problems. Lincoln Riley, though, ain't one. And so that is going to be what it is. Does Lincoln Riley save that league, which I think is literally what he is tasked with doing. I think he's absolutely tasked with doing that. Robert, I see the donation. Robert says, now that the Pac-12 went 0-5, I want Stuart Mandel to make a full-throated apology to the Big 12. Well, I would think that is probably somewhat necessary, or at least just a redo, like a piece that can kind of outline some of this, how the Big 12 fared against the other Power 5 conferences this year. And when I say Big 12, I don't need him to like go through and do it with Texas and Oklahoma this year. I need him to do it with Cincinnati, with BYU, with Houston, and with UCF, and see where that gets you. And again, when we talk about bowl season, if we're including those teams in there, obviously it looks much, much better for the Big 12 and what they were able to do. So I keep saying I'm going to work on trying to get Mandel on. He has come on with me before. In fact, there is a video on this channel from like very early on in the realignment phase back in like July or maybe early August, where he was on actually talking to me. So I'm going to try and do that at some point for you again, hopefully in the off season. We can have, now I will just tell you, I'm not going to come after him just guns a-blazing and, calling him an a-hole or anything like that. But I think a rational discussion about it would probably serve a lot of people well and do the league some good. So after the national championship game, when you'd imagine his schedule is going to lighten up a little bit, I will reach out. I'll reach out at some point and see if we can get him around and get that to actually happen for everybody's sake, right? We all feel like we're vindicated and justified and right, and it'll make you feel better if that guy comes around and validates those feelings, thoughts, and opinions, right? Trent says Utah, Arizona, and Arizona State. Thanks for the donation, by the way, Trent. Really appreciate it. Trent says Utah, Arizona, and Arizona State just seem like a bad match culturally in the Pac-12 these days, at least fan bases, if not the schools. Outsider, so maybe I'm wrong. I would have to say, I don't know that I have a good enough feel for that, and in terms of how it actually fits with the Pac-12. Obviously, Utah's pretty new there. Arizona and Arizona State have always been rumored to maybe have some wandering eyes. But again, so much of this always comes down to money, and it's like, because I think the insinuation there is like, hey, could they come to the Big 12 at some point? All about money. Like if the Pac-12 TV contract is better than what the Big 12's is going to be, or at least what they think it will be. Like if they think the money is going to be off, which I think most people would still guess, probably the Pac-12 TV contract, you're going to get $10 million more per season, somewhere around there. That's a number that I'm just throwing out of pretty much nowhere, but a fairly educated guess. If that's like the estimate there, then it's going to be hard, I think, for those schools to make that move. And I think a lot of people would still view it as fairly lateral. But as far as how well they fit, yeah, I don't. Utah does seem more like blue collar, obviously, than what the rest of the Pac-12 is. And then Arizona and Arizona State. I don't know. To be honest with you, I just don't know much culturally about Arizona and Arizona State, other than Arizona State is supposed to be like the best party school in the country, right? That's about the extent of my Arizona State knowledge. So anyway, I think wait, hang on. Max, before I leave here, Max, why do you want me clean shaven before the next live feed? I actually just shaved earlier today, like 2 or 3 hours ago. So it's not totally clean. But here's the problem. If I go totally clean shaven, it just accentuates the baby face. And then I feel like I look like I'm like, 23 years old, which, for some people might be great, but I'm trying to project a little bit older than that. I feel like this baby face has always made me look, well, a little bit like a baby, like a little bit too young. So, if you're gonna hoist around this jawline, I feel like you have to give it a little bit of stubble to go with it. So I don't think I can do that. But we just hit the 1 hour mark. I still have to do some work for the radio pregame show for K-State and LSU coming up on Tuesday. So I'm going to bounce. I'm going to dip. I'm going to keep working on that. But thanks for all you guys for hanging out. Thanks to everybody who donated. We'll keep it coming. TBD on what exactly the schedule is going to be with that and how it looks. We'll probably try and do something after the K-State game on Tuesday for sure, on Wednesday or Thursday midweek, and then kind of take it step by step and see where it goes from there. So appreciate all you guys. Hit me up on Twitter at JL Kurtz. If you have anything in the meantime, spread the word. I keep saying it. The best thing you can do for me is like the video, obviously donate as well, but for free, if you can just tell your friends about the channel, if you have friends that are interested in Big 12 football and college football, get them into the channel as well. That would be great. It would be awesome. All right. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday night. Hope you guys don't have to work your day jobs like me tomorrow. I am off in that regard, and I will talk to you all soon.